Green Parts of the Grapevine, Grape Video 4. In our first 3 videos, we talked about grapevines as they exist during the dormant period, when things look brown or tan and woody. But the real story begins in the spring. Here we are. It's the rebirth of the vineyard in spring. What a glorious time. The vines have been pruned, the trellis has been repaired, the vines have been tied to the trellis, weed spray has been put on under the trellis, perhaps some fertilizer too, and the grower is riding his tractor down through the vineyard, pondering the wonderful things that will happen this growing season. Everything that's going to happen good this growing season is dependent upon the emergence of this green shoot shown here. And as it gets larger, we hope that the season will continue to work its blessing on this vineyard. Because the emerging green shoots in a grapevine are so totally important to the success of the vineyard, at times growers take extraordinary measures to protect those emerging shoots. Here is overhead irrigation being applied to a vineyard during a spring freeze event in southwest Michigan. Well, it can look pretty at times with all the water and icicles that are forming, but it wouldn't be so pretty if all the buds froze. Here is a close-up of about a 1-inch long green shoot encased in ice, and it was protected from freezing temperatures through the night by this ice mass. So there is hope for this vineyard to produce a crop this season. So here we are in spring, getting ready for the season, looking forward to good things. Let's look closer at the green growth on the shoots during the growing season to understand what all is going on the grapevine during the growing season. Okay, let's begin our journey through the green parts of a grapevine with a quick review that green shoots come from buds, and there are 2 sources of buds on the grapevine. The first is the base bud that can occur near pruning wounds, and they can occur about anywhere on the vine. Here are some at the base of a multi-trunked vine. The second source of buds is from nodes on canes. Here is a 2-node spur showing shoots emerging from the 2 nodes on this cane. Now at each node there can be up to 3 shoots emerging, and we can see the primary obviously and the secondary, but the tertiary bud is kind of hidden underneath here, and most of the time we do not have all 3 shoots emerge and grow. Often though, if the vine is healthy and had good growing conditions the year before, we can have 2 shoots emerge from a node, such as this primary shoot and secondary shoot, and both of those have small clusters on them. This is the type of node that a grower will call a double, and it means that there's going to be a lot of fruitfulness and the potential for a large crop in the growing season when this happens. Well, here's something we can say about the shoots on a grapevine. They have indefinite growth. That is, they can grow and grow and grow and grow as long as the conditions are favorable for growth. The shoot on the right is the shoot tip of a very healthy shoot that is continuing to grow and put out new leaves along that green shoot at various internodes. The shoot on the left with the brownish color indicates that that shoot is slowing down in its growth, perhaps because of drought or nutrient stress or a combination of those two, or perhaps because of a large crop on the vine that steals the nutrients away from the shoot tip. For whatever reason, that shoot on the left is slowing its growth, whereas the one on the right continues to grow. And it will grow just as long as there are favorable conditions for its growth, right up into the fall until a freeze occurs or some other external factor will cause its growth to cease. That's not true of all plants. On some perennial plants, woody plants like tree fruit, the shoot will grow so long and then it will set a terminal bud, and we call that a determinate type of growth. But here on grapevines, they can grow just as long as they can, as long as conditions warrant. And I've seen shoots grow in the vicinity of 30 feet long in one growing season. That turns out to be about 2 inches per day on average. That's pretty vigorous growth. Well, for the rest of this presentation, we will discuss the structures that form on green shoots on a grapevine. And the most obvious structures are the leaves. The leaves, of course, are the factory that produces all of the energy that drives the growth and development of the grapevine. We're going to look at the structures of the leaves in this presentation and leave the physiology to another presentation at a later time. Well, our discussion of the structure of the leaves begins with the terms blade, or the flat surface, and margin. Margin is the edge of the grape leaf here, and those are two terms that sometimes are used when we talk about various activities of the grapevine. Another term associated with grape leaves is petiole. Petiole is the name given to the stem of the leaf that attaches the blade of the leaf to the green shoot, as shown here. And the petioles here are very reddish in color, so we decided to use this photo. Sometimes we take petioles and have them analyzed for nutrients to find out what we need to do to fertilize the grapevines. So petiole samples for nutrient analysis are done in many locations. And sometimes we talk about the portion of the leaf that is the angle created by the edge of the leaf, the margin of the leaf, where the petiole attaches to the blade. And the term for that is petiolar sinus. Here's one that's pretty obvious here, and there's one slightly obvious right here. The petiolar sinus can help define the structure of a leaf of a particular grape variety, or sometimes when things go wrong with the grapevine, the shape of the petiolar sinus changes, and it can help us diagnose grapevine problems. Well, a second type of structure on a green shoot of a grapevine is the cluster, the grape clusters, and there are numerous clusters per vine. They can be greenish or golden, such as the Chardonnay cluster, or they can be other colors. They can be red, or they can be bluish black, like this beautiful Merlot cluster. We're not going to talk much about these in this presentation because our next video is going to be entirely devoted to grape clusters. We're just going to say a few specific things about the occurrence of fruit in the form of clusters on grape shoots. We're going to use this photo of the Ives variety in the Finger Lakes region of New York to illustrate that grape clusters don't form on grape shoots until well into the growing season. Here are the 3 flower clusters on this long shoot, and they have yet to flower and produce actual grape clusters. Now we're in a vineyard in Michigan. It's a Cabernet Franc vineyard, and it is at the time of bloom. Look at all the growth. We have some shoots on this trellis that are probably 4 feet in length, and the vines are just going through bloom at this time. Contrast that with many trees, such as this flowering tree, the redbud tree, an ornamental tree, where the first thing that happens in the growth of this tree in the spring is flowering. This is also true of many fruit trees. Out of focus in the background here are peach trees with beautiful pink flowers, but in the lower left-hand corner you can see a close-up of these trees, and you can see that the peach trees are in bloom when there's barely any foliage, any growth of the shoots showing. Not so with the grapevine. The grapevine grows for 7 or 8 weeks, perhaps 50 days, before flowering takes place on the grapevine to make clusters. That's decidedly different than many other woody plants. Well, a third structure on green shoots of a grapevine are tendrils, as shown by the arrow here. Growers sometimes call them clingers, and plant anatomists tell us that on grapes this is a modified shoot. On other types of plants it can be derived from other types of tissues, but a tendril on a grapevine is a modified shoot. They can be very helpful when they attach to trellis wires, as shown here by the arrows, and that is the purpose of them, because grapevines themselves cannot be self-supporting generally, and they're looking for something to hold on to so they can climb up in the evolutionary sense through trees to get to the sunlight and so forth. So tendrils are very, very important for grapevines to be stable on our modern vineyard trellises. Well, what causes tendrils to wrap around other parts of the vine or objects like trellis wires and trellis posts is determined by plant hormones, a group called the auxins, and they will cause a differential rate of growth of the tendril depending upon what the tendril is touching and where. So it's pretty fascinating, and that's about the best I can explain it. So we'll move on, but they are amazing structures, and they do have a knack of finding things to attach to. The literature says that at times there are patterns of tendrils along a shoot. Here is a very vigorous shoot of the Syrah variety, and it has been said that on vinifera varieties there's often this pattern of tendrils at 2 nodes, and then it skips 1, and then 2 more nodes, and then it skips 1. And that is what we found on this very vigorous shoot of Syrah. My observations tell me, however, that When the shoot is not growing vigorously, this pattern does not hold at all. In fact, there may be a total absence of tendrils on very slow growing shoots. For example, here is a very vigorously growing shoot of the Concord variety towards the end of the growing season, and you can see that there are tendrils on 5 consecutive internodes. In the same vineyard just down the row where we had a slower growing shoot that has ripened off to become mostly woody, we find just 1 tendril on 8 nodes along the end of that particular shoot. So depending upon the vigor of the shoot and the variety, the arrangement of tendrils can be quite variable. We'll now talk about the 4th and last green structure on a green shoot of a grapevine. Here is our primary shoot. We know this is the stem of the leaf or the petiole. This is the lateral chute. That's the 4th green structure on a green shoot. It's a side shoot. And here's the bud at the base of that shoot. Collectively, all of those structures along that primary shoot we learned in a previous video is called a node. Let's look at this more closely. As we look closer at that nodal area, we can see something we call the petiolar scar. That means when we cut off the leaf, the end of the petiole left this scar on the shoot, and we call it the petiolar scar. As we're looking closer, we might confuse this, but this we know is the lateral chute. And here is the bud at the base of that lateral chute. If we look even closer, it's obvious that that bud is actually derived from and a part of the lateral chute, not the primary chute. And so all of the buds that we see on a cane in the wintertime were actually derived from the lateral shoots that grew out of the primary chute. We can look at this on a primary shoot. Yes, that's a shoot. It looks like a cane, but this is the late growing season and there are still leaves on the vine. So this year's growth, by definition, even though it looks like a woody brown cane, is still a shoot. And that's the primary shoot. And we can look at some of the structures we've been talking about in a different light. Here is the petiolar scar. This is the lateral chute scar. That's where the lateral chute was attached. And here's the bud. And what's useful about this is that we know that the bud on a cane is always apical to or above the petiolar scar. So if we look at a cane, whether it's on the vine or off, we always know the orientation of that cane from the tip to the base by the arrangement of the bud in relation to the petiolar scar, which is always below the bud, always basal to the bud. And there you have it. And this is very useful when you start pruning vines and when you start propagating vines with cuttings. Now we're looking at canes, not shoots, because all the leaves are off, and by definition, this is now a primary cane. Sometimes the lateral shoots become so large that they don't fall off at the end of the growing season, but they get woody and they get persistent. We call these persistent lateral canes. And here it is, a lateral cane in the dormant season attached to the primary cane. and we're going to talk about the importance of lateral canes when we talk about pruning grapevines. And that's it for this video. To briefly summarize, all green parts of the vine come from buds, which develop into shoots. And the structures attached to shoots on a grapevine include leaves, tendrils, lateral shoots, and clusters. We didn't talk much about clusters in this video because the next video is entirely devoted to telling the life story of a grape cluster.